Welcome into the shop, everybody. It is great to have y'all here. Now, if you prefer to watch these videos without the voiceover, there is a link in the description. You can go listen to it with just the sounds of me working. For this video, I'd like to voice it over and explain to you what is going on. So let's jump right in. We're starting by working on the actual breadboard end. I've set up my marking gauge to a 1/2 inch, and I'm marking a groove down the center of the breadboard end that we're going to cut on the table saw into the board. Whoa! Got a blade on backwards. I'm going to put my blade on backwards. That happens. So now that I have it right, you can see how that marking line really helps line up my cut. This is a 1/2 inch dado stack cutting that groove right down the middle of that board. It's really important that that is centered perfectly on the board. The depth of that cut is also about a 1/2 inch deep. Okay, with the grooves cut into the breadboards, we're now going to lay out for mortises. So there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mortises in each board. They're going to be 1/2 inch mortises, 1 3/4 inch deep. Actually, I think they're 2.5 inches deep. And I'm going to cut those on my old Oliver mortiser. What you saw me doing right there was spraying a little bit of water and denatured alcohol mixture to help keep the tooling cool and help soften the wood fibers. It's a new trick I've been trying. It's been working pretty well. Now, if you don't have a mortiser, you can use a plunge router just as easily with a 1/2 inch upcut spiral bit to cut these mortises. You probably can't go 2.5 inches deep, but you can get them to cut 2 inches deep. This is really an awesome machine, built in 1957, and I purchased it a couple years ago and restored it. Now, once I cut all these mortises, I'm going to come back and do some hand planing. I want to take a quick break real quick and tell you about today's sponsor, and then I'm going to explain to you what I'm doing here with the hand plane. Okay, so before we get too far into this build, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Fubo TV, which I'm really excited about because I actually used their service several years ago to watch the World Cup. Didn't have any other way to watch it other than streaming it through Fubo TV or with a cable package, which I don't have. Now, the great thing about Fubo TV is they have all the sports networks you need, which is my favorite part, but they also have a lot of great TV shows. They have The Office, which is one of my favorites. I've watched like five times in a row from start to finish. Shark Tank, so many good TV shows. They also have kid shows. If you have kids, you got to have kids TV. Fubo TV has you covered on that as well. They have over 100 of your favorite channels to choose from. They stream sports live in 4K, and if you can't watch live, you can record to their DVR cloud service and watch from your phone, tablet, smart TV, Roku, whatever you want to do, you're covered. You can sign up right now for a 7-day risk-free trial of Fubo TV and get 15% off your first month if you go to FuboTV.com/Andy Rawls. That's FuboTV.com/Andy Rawls. I just want to thank Fubo TV for being a supporter of this channel, for sponsoring this video, and for making a platform for me to watch sports on. I appreciate that. Go get your 15% off. Links in the description. Now let's get back to making these breadboard ends. Okay, so the point of using the hand plane here is, one, we want a straight edge because this is joining to the end of our table, but I don't want it to be perfectly straight. I actually want to dish out the middle of that breadboard just slightly so that when I set it on the end of the table, there's just a slight gap in the middle. And what that creates is called a spring joint. So if I put a clamp down the middle and clamp just in the middle, it's pulling it tight on the ends. It's kind of a mechanical spring, and then it sucks it down in the middle, and the middle is going to be glued, so that'll be held together. The ends are not glued, so that mechanical spring helps hold those ends against the edge of the table. Now, with that process done, I'm going to lay out and cut the tenons on the end of my table. I've got 2 marking knives set up, marking gauges set up. The first one is setting the shoulder, and then the second one is set to a 1/2 inch, the exact same one I used on the breadboard end. It's going to cut the tenon for the end of this table. So the first thing I'm going to do is use a plunge router with a fence set up on it, and I'm going to cut that shoulder line perfectly straight using my plunge router. Now I do this in multiple passes. I don't take it all in one cut, although in the video it appears like I'm doing that. Probably cutting 3/16 to 1/8 per pass. And I leave material on the end of the table because going all the way out to the end and clearing it all with the router would be too difficult. I find the router wants to rock. It doesn't have enough material to support it. So basically I'll cut that groove right down that's right on my shoulder and then come back and split out the waist with my chisel and just hand plane it. And then I grab a scrub plane, which is set for a real heavy cut, and I basically just plane it down almost flush, and then we'll come back with my low angle jack plane and do the final passes that flush it right up to our first cut there. Now the great thing about this is it's really easy to cut across grain on wood. You're taking advantage of the weakness of the wood fibers. You're not going with them, you're going against them, and they cut a lot easier. So it's really a pretty quick process as long as you don't leave yourself with too much material to begin with. If I tried to do it all with a router, I'm certain, and it's happened to me in the past, that I would tip that router down and just create problems. Here are the joys of working in a one-man shop, flipping a tabletop. I've gotten pretty good at it, although that card is looking a little sketchy. Probably need to build a new card. So basically what we're doing here is the exact same thing, flipped over on the other side, and that'll end up creating a 1/2 inch thick by 2.5 inch long tongue on the end of the table. So now that we've finished up with the hand plane, we've got that tongue made, I need to cut out the waist and create the tenons. You'll notice that there's a 1/2 inch of material from the shoulder forward that fits into that original groove we cut on the breadboard in. So basically all I'm doing is using the handsaw and just cutting these vertical straight cuts on the edge of my tenons. There's 5 of them. The middle one I think is 3 inches and the other ones are 2.5. So I've got a 3/8 of an inch upcut spiral bit set up with a fence on my router, and basically I'm just using that to cut the waist out for the tenons, and so it'll leave that 1/2 inch tongue that fits into the breadboard. This will hopefully all be making sense here real soon when we assemble it. Now in the video it appears like I do it all in one pass, but again I'm taking multiple passes before I get down to that last final pass. But this is a good clear shot of what's happening. And I will come back with a chisel and square off those radiuses. So here I've moved the whole table over to my workbench. Kind of got tired of working on that card. It doesn't stay very still. I need to size this groove and these tenons to fit my breadboard ends, the mortises. I always leave the tenons a little bit heavy, and I can shave them down fairly easy with a rabbet plane. This is almost too tight of a fit, but a really good fit nonetheless. One thing to mention is when you make breadboard ends, leave yourself 3/4 of an inch to an inch of length on each edge to disassemble the breadboard end. I don't have enough here. I had just enough material to get this length, so I think I have like a 1/2 inch hanging over. You'll see me in a little bit when I take it apart. It makes it a little bit difficult to get the breadboard end off if you don't have that overhang. So once I have both sides dry fitted on, I like the fit, I'll clamp it together, get it how I like it, and drill 3/8 holes through each tenon. Also, you can see my clamp here, I have a backer board underneath, so when I go all the way through, I'm not splitting out on the bottom. So here you'll see me removing the breadboard end. Basically have a block and I'm just hammering on that overhang. If you don't have enough overhang, I've done it before where I just left a 1/4 inch on each end and it just totally marred up the end of the breadboard. So this isn't even enough. Leave yourself an inch or more. It makes it way easier to get it apart. Well, once the breadboard end comes off, those holes you drilled will now be in the tenons obviously as well. And what we'll do is the 4 outside tenons, we're going to elongate that hole to allow for the wood movement. So again, I've got my 3/8 spiral bit in here. I've got a fence on the router and basically just plunging, and I think I'm elongating the hole. Basically, I'm just plunging down and elongating this hole. So what's going to happen is, like I said, that middle tenon will be glued and the outsides will allow that tabletop to float and move. That's what these elongated holes allow for, because there's going to be a pin going through there and the table can actually move around that pin as opposed to being locked in place. A little out of focus here on these shots. So this is a good view of how it finishes out. It's ready for glue up. I've got pins turned on the lathe, so we'll put this in the clamps, get it glued up, and pin it. So as I'm gluing this up, I did a shop update that I posted probably a couple weeks ago that shows this build finished with the benches and the tabletop, and it explains a little bit more about the breadboard ends. The end of this video is going to end with a segment from that, so you'll get to see the finished product, but you can also go check out the video if you want to get more information. Here you can see I'm starting to put in the dowels. Like I said, I turned these on the lathe out of walnut, and the middle ones are glued. Obviously you don't want to glue the outsides because you don't want to get glue down in that hole and catch the tenon and then your table can't move, and it defeats the whole purpose of what you're doing. Another thing to note is you'll see the overhang at the end, how I talked about leaving that long. When we're all done and it's glued up, it's easy to come back and leave 3/16 of an inch overhang. That way your table doesn't swell out past your breadboard ends and look kind of weird and leave a sharp edge. I just cut these off with a handsaw, and then once it's dry, come back with the clamps and sand it, and it is pretty much done. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you've learned a little bit about breadboard ends and how to make them. This is a really easy, straightforward process that I'm showing you, how I do them. A really cool functioning part of a table. I want to thank you for tuning in. I appreciate all the support you guys give me. Like I said, go check out the shop update if you want to see more information on this whole build as a whole. And here comes an excerpt from that video showing you specifically the breadboard ends finished. You see these on a lot of tabletops from big box stores, and they are totally non-functional and done incorrectly. You see a lot of people do them incorrectly. It's a traditional joint. It's designed to allow the tabletop to float and move and capture it on the ends, and helps keep it flat basically. So if you have like a trestle table, which is this style of base where you don't have a lot of support, the breadboard ends come in the breadboard ends come in really handy. For this, function-wise didn't really need them, but I only had 8-foot boards that came from the supplier, so I had to grade my ends back, take cracks out, and by the time I had done that, I needed to gain the length back because I was too short. So I opted to use the breadboard ends. Plus, I think they really wanted that. They liked that style. So that's why we have breadboard ends on this. The legs are turning. I set up and designed myself, and I think that's pretty cool. We did it in a way that the bottom detail kind of matches the bench legs, which I think is a cool feature. And even the top, it's a little bit different, but you kind of have this same cove setting on the bench leg as you do to the table.